Hello, everybody. Mark and Adi. We're back again. We are wrapping up our series on perfectionism with two episodes about what to do about it. We're going to focus on top down behaviors and bottom up processing. So, today we're going to start with the top down behaviors of how to manage and set goals. Adi, you want to tell us about the topic we're going to be covering today?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about kind of like these how do I how do I progress toward my goals? Because when people think about perfectionism, they often think of people who are actually workaholics. Those are connected, but they're not the same thing. The imagination of somebody who is a perfectionist is somebody who is produces a perfect product. That's not actually the case. Perfectionism often makes people stuck. They make it really difficult for them to progress or even start anything. So we talked about the different areas of life. They might be, if you're a perfectionist about your dating life, I think you gave that example in the past, then you might never go on a date. You might
Ain't
never
that the
start a
truth?
project. You might always wait for the perfect conditions for you to be perfect, for the others to be perfect, and for the world to be perfect. It doesn't actually motivate you to take progressive actions. So let's talk right now about what can we do. Now that we talked about it for a few weeks, what can we do to actually move forward and move from the set of rules of perfectionism? Because perfectionism, you can think of it as a set of rules. It must be this and then this. If such, then such. We want to move away from these rules that are rigid and do not allow us to freely and flexibly respond to reality, to a new set of rules, a rules under the guise of what's important to me, what's pleasurable to me, what are my goals in life, and what are my values. Can I make behavioral choices that reflect that rather than the need to be perfect, and the need to control? So the very, very first step is to set realistic goals. And they're like, yeah, of course, the set realistic goals. What do I mean by that? I mean setting a realistic goal for right now, for the next 5 minutes, for the next half an hour, for the next half a day, for the next week. If we set our eyes on the price, everybody, like, there's like this American, keep your eyes on the price. No, do not keep your eyes on the price. The price is really far away, intimidating, scary. We need to think, what are my goals for now? What is realistic for me to do right now that I most likely am going to be successful in producing or doing, and what's sustainable for me? So is it possible for me to progress on my schoolwork, or work on a project, or make one phone call, or update my dating app, or whatever it is that I can do at this moment? And we want to know, what does that mean? Like, what will be the end result that will be satisfying and good enough? That isn't so easy, and you might need to rely on others to reflect it with you. It's always good to talk to others that know your strength, know your weaknesses, and know your goals and values, to help you think what will be beneficial. And you can think of yourself as the best boss possible. If you had the best boss possible that wants to push you, also respects you, can be kind and compassionate, and isn't so riled up if there is a mistake or something doesn't go their way, what would they tell you that a realistic goal is? And it's very, very important to weave into that goal a new definition of what's success and what's a failure. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, and maybe next week when we talk about the internal processes, the bottom up. Um, One goal that, like as an example, setting the goal of, if I can't make it, or if this doesn't work, how will I respond effectively? Can I treat myself in a particular way? Who will I ask for help? So setting the goal in a sophisticated way that reflects reality, that some things might not work, or a deadline will not be met, or whatever it is that could happen. And I think that really leads us to the second one. The second, after like setting realistic goals, we need to move forward with it.
Yeah, so the second one is celebrating intermediate success. And Where a lot of this comes from for me is this wonderful book called The Four Disciplines of Execution, lovingly referred to as 4DX. If you are listening and you are a team leader or a manager or you own a small business, it's a great book. It's about 80 pages. It's super short, and it's about how to set up goal tracking and reasonable goals that are constantly being hit by a team. And one of the main principles they talk about is get people used to winning, right? And the idea of getting people used to winning is setting goals and setting up these celebrations that are easy to attain and that are, essentially what's 5 minutes in front of you, right? What's like what you can see immediately. They advocate having a public scoreboard where you're tracking, like, okay, today I did 2 hours of customer phone calls, or if you're doing personal work, today I made my bed, right? Stuff that's very easy. And by seeing that scoreboard, keep tracking and keep getting those wins, something in our mind, we get that dopamine rush and we're like, oh, great. Like, I am a winner. I'm used to winning. I'm going to keep this streak going. I mean, that's how things like Snapchat become so popular, is they leverage the psychological mechanism. So the idea here is learning how to see those as the wins, right? Rather than just what Adi was saying, keeping your eyes on the prize and focusing on making it the perfect outcome, is actually taking a time to celebrate those small successes. Because if you're a perfectionist, or you're the beautiful combination of perfectionist and workaholic, like yours truly, the reward that I find for completing my projects is more projects, right? It's literally like, hey, I crossed something off the list. What do I get to do? I get to add something new to my list. And while that can feel motivating, it actually creates a lot of burnout because the work never stops, right? And the pace just seems to be quicker and quicker and quicker. So, I was not the best boss for myself for my first couple years of being a business owner because I was a taskmaster. I was the most demanding, perfectionist, like completely judgmental boss I've ever had. Just trying to get myself to some kind of goal and not taking a time to celebrate those wins. And what those celebrations can look like, it can look like if you manage a team, it can look like allowing people to go home early. It can look like having a fun office event like a ping pong tournament. It can look like buying people a meal. It can look like, having a picnic, right? It can look like things where you're asking your employees what they want and making sure that they're getting those little wins when they're hitting their milestones. For yourself, I found it's a lot harder because you have to both be the giver and the receiver of the celebration. So something that I have instituted that I encourage a lot of my, solo entrepreneurs to do is just simply to record your accomplishments, even if they don't feel that big. If there's any sense of internal, like, yeah, you write that down, you record it, and I'm a big subscriber of reviews. So quarterly and annually, you review those and try to feel the emotions connected to those accomplishments. Be like, oh yeah, that email that I sent, that was like a really hard one. Like that was really awkward and that like totally worked out. Or like, wow, that talk I did turned out pretty good. Or I really pushed myself and I, did an extra mile on my bike or whatever it was. Finding ways and instituting systems, frankly, to get those celebrations practiced and online before they become automatic.
Somebody I worked with told me about a kid they worked with that would say to themselves, yay myself, yay myself. I really love that. It's a yay myself moment.
Yes.
Kind of like, can I cheer myself? Can I treat myself? What's rewarding for me? And sometimes it's really hard to know. So I want to encourage people to think of the word reward, fun, break, whatever it is that's hard for you to define for yourself, and maybe meditate on it. Take a piece of paper and actually write down everything that comes up. When a movie or a TV show is on, write down, this looks fun of what they're doing. This looks rewarding. Collect ideas, because it's not, especially if you do have perfectionism in you and it comes up, you might not be that familiar with allowing yourself to get rewards. And that's something that can be learned. So start collecting ideas of what might be rewarding and try. And match the reward in terms of timing. Like if there is a success, pretty quickly after, allow it to be celebrated and celebrate successes in a creative way. Again, if you were able, if something didn't go right, there was a miscommunication, a deadline was not met, and you actually talked about it productively, found a solution, made it work, made a contingency plan that kind of fixed the problem for you, that's a success as well. And we'll talk about expanding what success is next week. Let's talk about the kind of like I'm bringing us to responding compassionately to roadblocks, mistakes, and failures is the next stage in progressing toward our goals. Somebody who has perfectionism traits or states might have a real hard time responding to mistakes that might have happened, to roadblocks, and to what we call failures. Like, it failed, it didn't work. Whatever it is that I'm trying, it didn't work, compassionately and effectively. And again, next week, we'll talk a little bit more about the internal processes that come up when we label something a failure or a mistake. What we're talking about today is, what can I do? So noticing that you might want to give up, that you might not want to respond to it, you might want to go to blaming yourself, blaming others. Brené Brown says that she loves blame so much that she'd rather blame herself than no one else. If you want to see her little video on blame, it's adorable. So we want to move away. When you notice that what you want is to burn it because something didn't work, that rage is coming up, anger, let's try to think of how can we respond compassionately. And Christine Neff, who does a lot of work of self-compassion, has a really beautiful way of analyzing a self-compassionate response. So think to yourself, first of all, this is not what I wanted. This isn't what I wanted. This is not working. Or communicate to someone else. This is not how I wished this would go. This happens a lot. So secondly, this is not a unique situation. Nothing here is unusual. People fail and make mistakes and things don't work all the time in all areas of life. So frame it to yourself, okay, this didn't work, acknowledge reality, and I don't like it. It's not how this project was supposed to go. It's not how this action was supposed to be received, whatever it is. This happens frequently. What do I want out of this, and how can I get it? So if there was a mistake done, for example, I once, and Mark knows that, Mark sent me a bunch of websites to look at, and I thought those were recommendations. And I sent a patient a recommendation that turned out to be, I don't want to get into the details, but it was a disaster because it was not a recommendation. It was the wrong thing to send this person. He was very, very angry at me, this person, because he felt like, how do I send him to get treatment from a place that isn't right for him? And that was terrible. That was terrible. So what can I do in that situation? If I said, I'm quitting my job as a psychologist, clearly I'm not careful enough. I'm just going about sending people random recommendations that might damage them, then I would be in a very poor state. Instead, I decided, what can I do now? How can I respond to this effectively and treat it? So first I said, this is not what I wanted. I did not want to send a colleague, a patient, a peer, or a friend a recommendation to a place that actually didn't serve their needs. I didn't want that to happen. I was careless. A lot of people are careless. Being careless is part of, sometimes we want to be helpful and we don't think of it thoroughly. And what can I do to fix it? And I decided that the best and most effective thing will be an apology and taking responsibility for my mistake. And I did that, and that person was really grateful, because what happened in the end is that they learned that psychologists make mistakes as well, and they can own up. And for them, that was very healing. Luckily for me, that could have ended a different way. I'm giving this example because sometimes the mistake is because we did something wrong. We didn't live up to our perfectionist standard. I was really sad when that happened, and I needed to respond effectively. And the effective response was to ask, what are my goals? Again, what are my values? What's important to me? And what would be most effective in this situation? And we're going to talk next week about how shame and self-attack actually prevents us from going through that process and responding effectively to mistakes and failures. And again, that effective response is when you're the boss, when you're responsible, when you're the head of a team or a project manager, think, how can I respond to others' mistakes or failures most effectively? And I'm not talking about somebody who clearly isn't right for the job, or the personality is such that it's very hard to work with. Maybe we'll do a whole series about how to work with difficult people one day. Bless you, Mark. I was just going to ask you if you have something to add about.
Yeah, I have to add that sneeze. Luckily, I was muted. No, I'm also thinking, I would love to hear in the comments if people are interested in learning more about failure, because as you're talking, my mind is just buzzing of how to deal with failure is a skill that is undertaught. And I think it's something that's really, really critical for those business owners, entrepreneurs, and team leaders out there to learn how to fail and, more importantly, how to take responsibility for what they're doing. I think about, Pema Chodron, who writes, fail, fail again, fail better. I think of, a phrase that gets thrown around in the startup community a lot, which is...
that was Bertolt Brecht who said that.
Well, maybe she stole it. Pema was was my graduate speaker, and that was her whole thing. So maybe she stole that.
Or maybe we both don't know what the origin is.
Sneaky monk. Or something that's thrown around the startup community, which is like fail fast, right? The idea is to fail as fast as possible and to bounce back.
Yeah.
And I think, just like you're saying, just to highlight is there's an emotional process. It requires being very emotionally strong to tolerate those feelings, to tolerate some level of judgment, perhaps even some level of self-attack, and to extract valuable information. But what I tell the people that I work with is that they should be failing about 30% of the time, right? If you're not failing 30% of the time, you are not being challenged enough, right? You're staying in your lane, your job's too easy, and there's more potential inside of you. Right. The only way to learn is to be kind of on that edge where, like, sometimes, it's way too hard, you fail. Most of the time, like, you're still kicking ass, right? To keep your morale and to keep your job. But ideally, you're kind of wiggling that edge up. And the only way to wiggle that edge up is by failing and learning and being able to recover and bounce back.
And that's something that you learn little by little. It's not like because you heard this talk, you can do it tomorrow.
God, I wish.
That would be easy. Wouldn't it be nice? So I just want to kind of review what we talked about today. Today we talked about the goals side, the external processes of tackling perfectionism. And we talked about setting reasonable and doable goals, setting small goals that we can lead to step by step. We talked about celebrating successes, small successes, intermediate progress. And we talked about responding compassionately and effectively to failure, mistakes, and roadblocks. And again, next week, we're going to talk about all the internal processes that accompany that kind of change.
That's great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be streaming the next week or two, wrapping up this series. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.